Welcome, everyone, to this explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we are tackling one of the absolute most fascinating and honestly divisive topics out there right now. On one side, you've got these incredibly passionate supporters claiming we're witnessing a global blockchain economy, a true financial revolution that's going to completely change the internet. But then, on the flip side, critics are pointing to massive volatility and insisting the whole thing is basically just a decentralized delusion. It is a massive clash of perspectives. So today, we're going to cut through the noise and just break it all down using the data. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale and the sky-high stakes of this ecosystem, we have to start right here. $14 billion. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering amount of money lost to crypto scams in the year 2021 alone. We're not talking about spare change lost in the couch cushions here. We are talking about entire life savings, massive institutional funds, real-world money just literally evaporating into thin air. So, to make sense of this rather chaotic universe, we're going to break it down into 5 digestible pieces. Today we're covering 1. Digital gold or delusion. 2. Failing the money test. 3. Anatomy of a rug pull. 4. The hype machine. And 5. The greater fool theory. Okay, let's dive right into part 1. Digital gold or delusion? To really understand the broader crypto industry, we have to look at the foundation. It's basically the bottom block in a massive, very unstable game of Jenga, Bitcoin. Now, back in the original 2008 white paper, its creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, explicitly described Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The whole utopian vision was to build this decentralized alternative to traditional banks where everyday people could just transact totally free from corporate control. Sounds pretty great, right? Well, when we actually hold that promise up against the hard data, a pretty stark contrast emerges. Instead of this decentralized financial revolution for the people, roughly 2% of addresses control 95% of the entire Bitcoin supply. So actually, scratch that whole decentralized utopia idea. The reality is a wealth distribution that is incredibly concentrated and completely top-heavy.
Which brings us to section 2. 2. Failing the money test.
If we're going to be completely objective here, we need to evaluate Bitcoin strictly on its own stated goal, which is acting as a currency. Economists usually define money using 3 basic criteria, and honestly, the data shows Bitcoin strikes out on all of them. First up, as a medium of exchange, it is incredibly slow. We're talking 500,000 transactions a day compared to Visa processing hundreds of millions. Second, as a store of value, it's wildly volatile. Prices can swing as much as 20% in a single month. And third, as a unit of account, businesses don't actually price goods in Bitcoin. They still price everything in US dollars and just kind of do the conversion math at the checkout. But the sheer, mind-boggling inefficiency is where the data gets really striking. A single Bitcoin transaction has the equivalent carbon footprint of roughly 1.5 million Visa transactions. To put that into perspective, the amount of real-world energy required just to keep this network running makes it fundamentally totally impractical as an everyday payment system. And we don't even have to guess if this works in the real world, because the experiment already happened. Back in 2021, El Salvador actually made Bitcoin legal tender, right? They gave citizens a $30 incentive just to download the national Chivo wallet. The results? Overwhelmingly clear. 60% of people took the free cash and literally never opened the app again. 38% just completely abandoned it. And remittances, which was supposed to be this magical use case for sending money seamlessly across borders, only 2% of users even bothered with it. A staggering 98% of people ignored the feature entirely. Let's move on to section 3. 3. Anatomy of a rug pull. So if Bitcoin is the so-called foundation, what happens when we venture out into the totally unregulated Wild West of decentralized finance? Well, we enter a landscape absolutely dominated by something called the rug pull. This is basically an operation where scammers create and hype up a brand new token, convince the public to pour their savings in, and then, poof, they completely vanish with the funds. An investor from our sources actually compared this to a margarita. It's like you fill up the glass with your hard-earned money, and right when the glass is perfectly full and the excitement is at its absolute peak, the scammer just picks up your drink and walks out the door. Let's walk through the exact pipeline of how this con actually works, because it is essentially a brilliantly designed psychological trap. Step 1. The scammers buy up a massive supply of their own token for absolute pennies. Step 2, they flood social media with totally artificial hype, paying off influencers to promote it. Step 3, everyday folks see all this buzz, they feel the fear of missing out, and they start buying in, which pumps the price straight up the charts. And then finally, step 4, the scammer unloads their massive supply, takes all the real cash, and the token's value absolutely plummets to zero. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what's at stake here. $60 million.
In our source material, an investigative journalist in Dubai tracked down this notorious 20-something scammer known as Mr. X. When they asked him how much he pulled in from just a single rug pull, this was his answer: $60 million. This is not petty theft, guys. We are talking about highly organized, multi-million-dollar wealth transfers right from the pockets of the public straight into the hands of anonymous developers.
On to Section 4, 4.4, the hype machine.
So how on earth do scammers, and even venture capitalists, convince everyday internet users to keep pouring real money into a system this fragile? They use a highly coordinated toolkit. They lean heavily on celebrity endorsements, and by the way, some of those celebrities have been fined millions for hiding the fact they were paid to shill these tokens. They use completely fabricated, AI-generated news articles to trick people into thinking huge financial shifts are happening. They absolutely weaponize FOMO, and they use these cult-like catchphrases, telling everyone to have diamond hands and to hodl onto their coins, which basically just shames anyone who gets nervous and tries to cash out.
Now let's see how this builds, because the real genius of this hype machine is its ability to constantly reinvent itself. It started with Bitcoin in 2008. When that didn't pan out as an everyday currency, the hype just smoothly shifted to ICOs, initial coin offerings, in 2017. Then came the absolute explosion of NFTs in 2021, where we saw digital pictures of apes selling for $69 million. And when that eventually cooled off, the buzzwords just shifted again to Web3 and play-to-earn games. The pattern is clear. Every single time a bubble bursts, they just repackage the exact same underlying technology into a shiny new narrative.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, the Greater Fool Theory.
To really understand the core economic engine that has driven this entire timeline, we have to look at the fallout. What happens when a system relies entirely on constant hype? Well, real people get deeply hurt. Look at the play-to-earn game Axie Infinity. Players in developing nations like the Philippines were literally treating this game as a full-time job just to feed their families. But the second the hype slowed down, the token crashed by 99%. Because without a constant, massive influx of brand new players bringing fresh money into the game, the entire economy just shattered.
Now, what's really interesting here is that there is one theory, a real aha moment, that perfectly connects the original Bitcoin hype to million-dollar monkey JPEGs and crashed video game economies. It's called the Greater Fool Theory. It's the concept that the price of an asset doesn't actually need to be tied to any real-world utility or actual cash flow. The price only goes up because buyers believe that somewhere down the line, a greater fool is going to come along and buy it off them for an even higher price.
And that leaves us to ponder this final, deeply provocative question. If the value of this entire multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem relies completely on recruiting the next buyer to put real money in, what happens when the world simply runs out of fools? Look, whether you choose to see crypto as this brilliant evolution of finance or just an extraordinarily elaborate house of cards, the data tells us one thing for sure. Its survival absolutely demands a never-ending supply of new money. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured look at the data helped you make sense of all the noise out there, and I cannot wait to dive into our next topic with you. Stay curious.